in 1,000 years' time, in 2,000 years' time, in 5,000 years' time, everything that you fought for, everything that you worked for will be meaningless. People say, I don't want to talk about politics, I want to talk about Islam. You're saying, I don't want to talk about life's affairs, I just want to talk about the beliefs of Islam. That person doesn't want the connection between Islam and life's affairs. Islam is meant to guide life's affairs. So once you know this kind of understanding of what revival means to bring from the dead to life, from darkness to light.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome you all to the session by Abdullah Andalusi on the topic The Radical Sunnah Method to Reviving the Entire Muslim World. This session is for the IPS students in particular, and all the source code students are invited as guests. So first of all, we would like to thank Abdullah Andalusi for giving us time. And before we start, just to let all the audience know, Abdullah Andalusi is an international speaker, thinker, debater, and an intellectual activist for Islam and Muslim affairs. His work involves explaining and demonstrating by rational argument the intellectual proofs for the Islamic belief system and Islamic solutions for contemporary problems. He has been discussing about history, philosophy, current affairs, and critically evaluating the position of the creeds, be it Christianity, Judaism, polytheism, or lack thereof, be it atheism. And finally, the political philosophies such as liberalism and socialism. Thanks a lot, Abdullah, for giving us time. And it's over to you now.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Barakallahu feekum for inviting me. I hope everyone's doing okay on this Sunday. Well, I suppose it might be Sunday evening for you, I think, if you're in Pakistan. And it's my pleasure to be here. And I thank you all for attending. So I kind of wanted to talk about this very interesting topic of revival and the Sunnah method for revival. Now, one of the many things that I think many people have heard is there are many different Islamic movements and groups and organizations which are calling for revival, or they use the word nahda in Arabic. Some might use the word tajdeed. And everyone says that they are doing it from the Sunnah, right? The Sunnah method. But we don't really get much questioning as to what is the Sunnah method revival, but more importantly is the big one. What is revival? Like, what is it? What do you mean by that word? Revival of what? For what purpose? What does it look like? Now, this is the key issue, because most people don't define what revival is. They just hope you assumed a meaning that you think it might be, or they keep it vague, mainly because it might be vague to themselves. And that's the problem is, if you don't know what the destination looks like, then you don't know how to get there. You won't know how to get. It's like starting to build a house and you don't know what the house looks like before you build it, or building a ship or building a car. You don't know what it looks like. You're not really going to get anywhere. Even if you're very good at welding metal together and bolts or cement or what have you, or bricks, great. You're good at putting one brick on top of another brick, but you won't get a house out of it if you don't know what it's actually going to look like and how the structure is supported and so on. The structure you'll make will collapse. So this is, I think, the key question that we have to start first before we discuss a method for revival and why we are even thinking about revival in the first place. So the word, for mahda in Arabic denotes bringing something back to life. And there's a kind of juxtaposition between a living thing and a dead thing, right? So we're trying to bring something from the dead to life, to revive it. So what does life and death mean in this? Does it mean that we're just making humans, bringing them to life, or no one could bring anyone to life if they're dead? So it doesn't mean it in its literal sense. So what does it mean then? What are we talking about? What is the dead thing and what is the living thing? So ultimately, we're talking about communities, societies of people. And the difference between a living and a dead Well, let's look at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why were the pagan Arabs described as, you could say they were the living dead in essence? And what did life look like? What did revival look like for them? How did Islam change them? And then we'll look at if we can see a parallel today. So the pagan Arabs were living on trade routes in the Arabian Peninsula. There was many of them were living in cities and towns. Others were nomads, so they were the Bedouin. But generally speaking, from one day to another, life pretty much remains the same. Sure, there was battles between different tribes, territory was changed, but pretty much every day looked like the previous day. There was no development, no improvement, and there was no improvement to any particular goal. It was just the survival. It was just maintaining one's reputation, the reputation of one's tribe against other tribes, one's reputation within the tribe against your fellow members of the tribe. So you must to maintain your reputation or to increase your social standing if you can against others. But apart from that, surviving, making sure that your family name, your clan name, and your tribe has a reputation that is protected or maintained against others was the only consideration from a day-to-day basis. Now, there's a narration attributed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where to quote it, it's narrated that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "He whose 2 days are equal is a loser, and he whose today is worse than yesterday is deprived of mercy or accursed. He who is not experiencing an increase is in decrease, and he who is decreasing, death is better for him than life." So this was recorded by Al-Dailami in his book Al-Firdous. Now, there are many hadith scholars that have said that this might be da'if. Others have said that it was attributed to you could say like a Muslim religious man, very religious man called Abdul Aziz ibn Abi Rawad, who saw the Prophet Muhammad in a dream, and he saw this narration from the Prophet to him sallam, in a dream. Others have said the isnad is sufficient, and so on. So without going into the particulars of that narration, I find it interesting on the substance of this narration. All right, that basically it seems to make sense, a lot of sense. If your day is the same as it was yesterday, and you have not done anything to improve, then this is basically like, you could say, the dead. Because what does a dead thing do? Right? A dead thing doesn't do anything. It doesn't change. If you leave a rock on a road and you just don't touch it, and the wind doesn't blow it, and nothing and an animal doesn't knock it around, it doesn't move. It stays exactly the same where it is. The only time a rock moves is it's reacting to something, as in something kicks it, and then it goes flying in a direction. But the wind blows it, and then it might be able to move if it's small enough for the wind to do that. But it doesn't change if it's left to itself. It doesn't change at all. What does a living thing do? Right? A living thing grows. Right? You plant your plants in a pot or in a garden or on a field, and with the sunlight and everything in its favor, or it will grow. Sometimes even despite things being against its favor, it will still grow, or it will, like the plants will bend towards the sunlight if it's in a shaded area to get as much sunlight as it possibly can, and then grow from that. So it adapts to its environment. It tries to grow, increase itself, to reproduce itself. That's what living things do, to reproduce, to grow, to not just to survive, but proactively survive. So adapt to their environment to survive and to change. Right. So this is what living things do, as opposed to dead things. So once you know this kind of understanding of what revival means, to bring from the dead to the light, to life, and there is obviously the other phrase used, from darkness to light. Right? So where darkness, you can't see where you're going. In the dark, you don't move. Right? If everything is completely dark and you're out on a field somewhere, you're very careful, right? Because you probably are, unless you're hoping for someone to catch you, to obviously call you, you won't move. But if it's dark, you generally try not to move, especially if, let's say, it's dark and you're near an edge of a cliff and you don't know where the cliff is. You're not going to move because you don't want to fall off. So you're going to stay exactly still. You're not going to move because it's dangerous if you did. But if there's light, you can see where you're going, and then you can move. You can go where you need to go if there is light around. So the other analogy from darkness to light doesn't just mean light as in guidance, but you could say in a way it promotes movement because you know where you're going. Whereas if it's dark, you don't know where you're going. So the idea is that a society or a people are dead if they don't really do anything different. They don't have a goal. They don't have a purpose. They don't try to change themselves. They only react to things that happen to them. But apart from that, they don't do anything else. So this was the pagan Arabs. They never really achieved any great civilization because in the Arabian Peninsula, because they were just there surviving and fighting each other for the sake of reputation and rank. They were just adjusting with each other, competing with each other, and that means obviously and fighting with each other, raiding each other, and so on and so forth. So nothing changed for them for hundreds, if not thousands of years, until the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and told them not just a different way to live, but reminded them of the purpose of life they had. And what is interesting is the pagan Arabs knew about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. They knew about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They had some traditions, some ritual practices like the salah, although not the 5 times a day, but they knew what the salah was, the prostration. They knew about the Hajj, of course. This was still a practice for the pagan Arabs. So the pagan Arabs had some practices from Ismail alayhi salam, obviously from his father Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they had this preserved tradition. They just added things on top of it, like other idols and so on. Now, the pagan beliefs were basically there was one God, there was the highest God was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they eventually added family members to him or special friends, family members, and so on that were given control over some areas of the world, like the god of fertility, a god of health or healing, and things like this, which is typical for pagans and polytheists. This head god becomes too far away, too distant, and so it's easier to worship things which are closer to you, that look like you, or you have a statue that you can look at, and so it's easier. So you pray to those things, which are, you could say, working on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously the highest God, as they would say, as they might describe it. Or they might just simply say that these are all created, but they have a God status, because the word ilah in Arabic, I mean, in most traditions, the word God can be used for a number of things beyond just the infinite, all-knowing, unlimited creator. So anything that's basically almost superhuman was called a God. And it's interesting for anyone who actually wants to see a real life, you say a current day understanding of like what the pagan Arabs had, as well as what the ancient Greeks had, what the ancient Egyptians had in terms of making gods from despite believing there's a head god or a creator god. Then look at the people of India, what's called the Hindus or the polytheists of India. They believe in a head god Brahman, but they have all these sub gods which have birthdays. They're they're born, and they're like Krishna and so on, but they give them they celebrate their birthdays. Vishnu and Shiva. It's like, what? You're worshiping something that has a birthday? Yes. Anyway, I don't want to get distracted, but the pagan Arabs had Abrahamic religion, so they understood Abrahamic religion, but they obviously didn't know the Bible very well. They didn't know about Judaism very well because they didn't see the need to. They had their own tradition from Ismail alayhi salam. So they said, "Oh, we have our traditions from him, so that's enough." They don't about revelation or angels or things like this. They didn't know much about that stuff. Anyway, so this was the pagan Arabs. Nothing changed in their lives until something happened. Until they were told that they were reminded in a way of something they had forgotten, but it looks completely new to them. All right, the idea of there's revelation and there is things that Allah wants us to do specifically, because the pagan Arabs before that lived as well. Their society, their culture, their parents told them what to do, so they fulfill the things that society expects them to do. And while they're doing those things, they try to appease Allah or the other gods by giving them things or by asking them for things. So God was used, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pagan idols were viewed as things that you can ask them for. You can ask them for things and they give it to you. You may have to make a promise for them. You may have to give them an offering, like I'll give you some dates, or I'll give you some fruit, or I promise that I will do this if you give me this, like a transaction or just asking for a favor. That's all that religion was for the pagan Arabs. But their life was about just continuing their culture, continuing their societal, the things that society expected them to do, not to get shame, not to bring shame on their family was the only thing that motivated them on a day-to-day basis, apart from survival, was not to bring shame or to be shamed by another clan or tribe or what have you. So that was the pagan Arabs. Then the Prophet Muhammad, a man who was known amongst them as a noble family, never known to lie, was actually so much so he was so trusted that even after he showed the revelation to them, he recited the Quran to them, and they attacked him for it and they called him a liar, they still used to leave their properties with him when they would go, because there was no idea. I mean, I suppose there were ideas of locks, but unless only rich people could have locks. But generally speaking, if you have to travel a long distance as a merchant and leave your stuff behind for months, you don't know someone could take it, right? You need someone who lives in that town, who's not going anywhere, to look after your stuff. There was no banks back then where you could have safe deposit box, but you could leave it with a trusted person. And the Prophet Muhammad sallam was always trusted to leaving things with him. And because, by the way, because people you might leave your property with, they might be for different clan, they might have issues with you, or they might have allies that have issues with you. So it's hard to trust people. But the Prophet Muhammad sallam was always trusted. So a man from amongst them revealed to them that the head God is not the head God, he's the only God. Everything about their culture was most of it was made up, was invented, was their forefathers had added things, and that this head God or the only God didn't only want offerings when you want something for him, but he had given everyone a purpose. Everyone had a purpose to fulfill in life, which they will be judged on. It wasn't just he was there to give you favors when you need him, but he actually expected something of you. Not your society, not your parents, not your culture, but he expected things from you, and anyone else's expectations didn't actually matter. Actually was meaningless. Tribal fighting, conflicts, clan, your family name, what your parents ask you to do, beyond obviously your duty to them established by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but just basically your parent expectation. None of that has any meaning outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what he expects from you, what he commands you, and the purpose of life for all creation and for you as part of that creation. So this was very radical idea for the pagan Arabs. You're saying that our parents are wrong. You're saying that our forefathers, our grandfathers, our clans, our tribes for centuries and centuries and centuries, that they are all wrong. but they invented things, and you want us to throw all that away because you're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who doesn't ask us, like we give him things or we offer him things in return for favors, but you're saying that actually he has demands of us that we are not fulfilling, and that we have to fulfill this. We are deficient if we actually don't fulfill that, rather than prefer our clan, our tribe, or our family. This is a very radical idea for them. They reacted predictably with hostility. Most of them reacted with hostility. So before I get to an ideal and what is the purpose of life, which I think is the key question, because this is what the Prophet Muhammad was basically teaching us: the purpose of life. What is the purpose of human beings? I kind of want to draw a parallel to today's society. Right now, I went to many Muslim countries, and I had the great fortune and privilege to go to Pakistan last year. I actually went twice to Pakistan. First time for 2.5 months, second time for 2 months. So I had a really amazing time, mashallah. It was really great to be surrounded by with Muslims. And of course, the hospitality there is amazing, as always, to be expected. And I saw beautiful and wonderful potential in Pakistan. In fact, the heartbreaking thing for me when I go to Muslim countries is I see so much unused potential, and Pakistan especially the unused potential is heartbreaking, actually, because I can see so much good can be done, but it's being restrained because of the unfortunate mindsets in the Muslim world, in all Muslim countries. And what is that? What is the thing that keeps Muslims back? And it's actually very simple, but very profound, which is Muslims lack purpose. Like the pagan Arabs, we lack an understanding of our purpose. Islam has become today like the Millah of Ibrahim, the religion of Abraham, became to the pagan Arabs. They knew about it, they looked up to it, they revered Ibrahim alayhi salam as their forefather, as a prophet of God. They revered Ismail alayhi salam as a prophet of God, as their forefather. But it didn't go beyond that. They forgot the mission that the creator of the universe has given mankind. And for them, it was merely about keeping up the practices and the rituals and keeping society or the culture, protecting the culture of the society and resisting any change to it, and basically just fighting with each other to get, position. Not necessarily physical fighting; it could just be, competition within that society. But all they cared about was your family position and the ranking of that society. That was the only thing that kind of was important to them. Like, I don't know if you understand what you might call prison culture, right? But there are some movies and TV programs about prison culture. In prison, all the prisoners are not really meant to be doing anything except staying in prison. All right. There's, maybe they're put to do work, but not to improve their lives. They're meant to serve an amount of time in exact same conditions, but their day to day is meant to be exactly the same. Right? Every day is part of their punishment. But in the prison, what do the prisoners do with each other when there's nothing else to do, when there's no purpose to accept or serve your time there until your time runs out? They focus on ranking, like fighting with each other or trying to get, a higher rank than each other, or maintain the ranking system. So make sure that everyone who's underneath me, if I was a top prisoner, stayed underneath me and doesn't try to go above me. That's their only thing they were doing. But their day to day was the same, exactly the same, until their time runs out. And in the Muslim world, we are prisoners in a way, in a similar way, where all we're doing is just focusing on keeping things exactly the same, maintaining the social ranking, or competing with each other for social ranking until our time runs out, until we die. And that's pretty much it. Not bringing shame to the family. I suppose for the prisoner example would be not bringing, not being humiliated by a fellow prisoner. So maintaining your reputation. Same with gangs as well. The idea of fighting for your reputation. Because if you have no reputation, then everyone will tread on you, right? So people will kill for their reputation, because without the reputation, then it's worse than dead. You're better dead than actually having the worst reputation in society. Whether you're in a gang or you're in a prison or in many places in the Muslim world. So when I realized that basically the comparisons are almost identical to the pagan Arabs, right? Now it's called Jahiliyyah. I suppose many Muslim scholars have made the same comparison. They said that there's Jahiliyyah of the pagan Arabs is like Jahiliyyah of today, ignorance. But the problem is that no one really defined what Jahiliyyah is, right? So to be ignorant, but to be ignorant of what, right? So that Allah exists, what the pagan Arabs knew that He exists. To be ignorant of their religion of Ibrahim, what they knew about the religion of Ibrahim, and we know about the religion of Islam. So what is the ignorance? And the ignorance is the ignorance in purpose. That the creator of the universe, He created everything in this universe. He created you, and He created you specifically. Every individual watching this, He created you specifically to fulfill a purpose, a cosmic purpose. For you to choose Him as the greatest Qur'an, the greatest criteria above everything else. So you have the ability to choose. Animals don't have that choice. Plants don't have that choice. Obviously, angels don't have that choice. And of course, all the planets in the universe don't have, any kind of choice either. They all fulfill the roles they are given to fulfill. But we have a special purpose, an extra special purpose, which is that we are meant to bear witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through our actions, through our deeds, and through our trust, iman, right? From amana to trust, right? So we put trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it looks like it's against our interests initially, or material interests. So this is a cosmic purpose. No one gave you this purpose, not your parents, not your society, not your culture. No one gave you this purpose except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in 1,000 years' time, in 2,000 years' time, in 5,000 years' time, everything that you fought for, everything that you worked for will be meaningless. The people that the culture that you're following will be a different culture, because culture changes over time. The language will probably be different, much like if you went 5,000 years back in time to meet your ancestors, they wouldn't understand your language. They wouldn't understand what you're saying. So the environment will be different. Everything will be whatever houses you built will be destroyed eventually. Everything you work for, whatever nice car you have, or however much children you have, eventually, unless in at least 5,000 years, 10,000 years, maybe definitely 1,000,000 years, you won't exist. You won't exist, of course, but nothing about what you did would exist. Nothing that you achieved or did will exist, and it would all be completely meaningless, except that which you did for the sake of the one who never forgets and never dies. Right? So once you see it like this, you realize that everything in this world is meaningless except what you do for the one who created reality, and will always remember every single one of your deeds for the rest of eternity. Right? Now that changes your perspective. And what is the ideal then? Because there's a purpose. What is our purpose then? Our purpose is to make Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the highest criteria for our good and bad. What we should do, what we should not do, only Allah can define that. Nothing else. If you look in a microscope, or you see a telescope, using any science you can think of, does the universe tell you good or bad, should or should not? It doesn't. The universe just tells you what is possible, what is not possible, and that's it. The only halal and haram of the material universe is just what's possible and impossible. But good and bad, what you should do, what you should not do, this can only come if you have a purpose, if you're meant to be doing something, If you're meant to be doing something, if your purpose in life is to make Allah the highest criteria for your actions, then doing what He wants, doing what He has demanded of us, this is the good. And refraining from what He's prohibited us from doing, where He said that this is not in service to Him, it follows the bad. This defines what bad is. Good and bad have no other definitions beyond that. Purpose, right? Now we could say the purpose of life, another way of saying it is the pleasure of Allah. And many of you might even say this as a phrase, right? Yeah, we know the purpose of life is the pleasure of Allah, but do you really understand that? Right? Do you really what do you know about that? Right? Like, what do you mean by it's serving His pleasure? Is it just like there's an overlord over you and he gets happy if you do something that he wants and he gets unhappy if you don't do something he wants? Is that how you understand it? Or do you understand it on the level that every atom in your body has been created for the purpose to make you as a structure, so that you can bear witness to the existence of Allah and his power to create by bearing witness to Him in your actions, that He exists, and because the reason why I'm doing this action is because He exists and He has He has created me and has given me life and has given me the ability to make decisions. He created the free will itself to bear witness to Him. And the only way free will can bear witness to Him is by choosing Him when you have other options. So Allah deliberately creates free will. He deliberately creates other options because by choosing Him, you are bearing witness that He is the creator of the universe, and you are bearing witness to Him because everything in this universe bears witness to Him. Now, what I mean by bearing witness is, I make it very clear that, if you look at a painting and you've not seen the painter, you've never seen the painter, you don't know if it's a man or woman or anything, right? But the painting bears witness to the painter. The fact that the painting exists shows that the painter exists. But something else, it shows that the painter can paint and can paint that. So it's not just it shows the painter exists, but it's a proof that the painter can paint and can paint what you're seeing. So everything in this universe is in fact, your purpose of life is the same as the purpose of the planets, the same as the purpose of the rock, the purpose of the plants and the animals. Everything bears witness to the Allah's existence and His ability to create. If He never create anything, how would He be any different to something that cannot create? Right? You know what the Quran, in this verse of the Quran that says, is the one that can create and the one that cannot create equal? To paraphrase. So this verse has many meanings. It's used generally to talk about why you're worshipping a statue that can't, but also because the Quran has many beautiful meanings in each ayah. Think about it. If Allah never created anything, how would He be different from someone who lacks the power to create? Right? Because He's timeless, right? So He creates time. So if He never created anything, it would be no different to Him having no power to create. So He chooses to create, which shows He can create. And Him choosing to create you are an evidence of His power to create. His power to create many things, but also your ability to have free will is proof that Allah can create creations that can choose for themselves. Because everything else has to follow laws. Everything else doesn't have a choice. So you have an extra special purpose. That yes, your existence, your biology, the fact that you are a structure that moves and lives and so on, all this bears witness to Him. He can create a universe that can create living things. Yes, but there's something extra special. We have a special feature that other creations don't have, which is we have the power to choose. And Allah has given us a power to choose. So He can create creatures that have the power to choose. Right? They have the power to choose and have free will. So you then choosing him despite other alternatives is something extra special that no other creation in this universe has, which is you can bear witness to Him. So why are you choosing Him? Because He is worthy of being chosen because he is the ultimate source of all things. So you choose, every time you choose him, you bear witness to him, his power, his existence, and his authority over you. Every time you choose him. This is our purpose in life. There's no other purpose. Nothing else has any meaning. Nothing or action you do, whatever, will last even 5,000 years, most likely. No matter how famous you are, because we don't know who existed 5,000 years ago. You know, any famous people, we don't. I don't think it was 5,000 years ago. It's the cutoff. We don't have known anyone before that. In terms of in the preserved human history. Yeah. So there's the purpose. Now, how does that affect society? How does that change society? Now, I've reached my ending here. Well, a society that's dead just continues to exist. A society that has purpose changes. Why? Because purpose gives you a direction. In fact, it's not any kind of purpose, but a special purpose, an ideal, as it's called, a principle. And the principle is that we are to bear perfect witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are to bear to reach perfection in choosing him and making him the highest criteria for our society. But here's the thing, you can't reach perfection. Humans generally, the average human, right, can't reach perfection. But it doesn't matter, because what matters is your attempt to reach perfection. So you're always going to try to improve and change and see what you did wrong and make it and try to basically enhance it, advance it, improve it. The Prophet Muhammad said that a believer is not stung by the same hole twice. Right? This is one hadith which is Sahih, where you don't a believer doesn't fall down the same hole twice. Now, there's many wisdoms in this, but one important wisdom is that you learn from your mistakes, and because you are to improve. So, as Muslims, we are meant to improve, but not improve for improvement's sake, but improve getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And improving, getting closer to him, has many, many ramifications, many consequences. So it's not just, I'm going to improve my dhikr. I'm going to make my salah perfect. I'm going to make sure that my siyam is perfect. I'm going to make sure that when I go hajj, I do it perfectly. It's not just that. It's, I'm going to improve my business. I'm going to improve society. I'm going to be more merciful to society. I'm going to do things that improve the infrastructure of my country or my land. I won't say my country, but like all Muslim lands are one. But I'm going to do things that benefit all the travelers, maybe make what the Muslim world used to. Right? They developed places for travelers to stop, which are protected, and give them food and shelter that would improve traveling and improve merchants, improve commerce, right? To build actual roads where people could safely walk on without stumbling or falling down, or so they could bring carts and things like this. That improves the amount of produce from the farms to the cities, for example. The Muslims built Bimaristans, right? So Bimaristan, from the Persian Bimar, Istan, house of sickness, it was a place where sick people can be treated. Why? Because they wanted to get close to Allah. They said, if I want to show mercy to the people, I want to get thawab, I want to get barakah, so that the people benefit. People invented things, discovered new technologies. Why? Because these new technologies helped the people, made life easier for them, removed their hardships, because they wanted to get close to Allah, and they published their research so that it would be a sadaqah jariyah. So even after they die, this research would continue, and while they're in their grave, they're still getting thawab. I often just say that Muslims were thawab capitalists. Right? We were thawab capitalists. Thawab meaning like good deeds, So we were getting good deeds. We were focused on this. This means that our society was dynamic. We were transforming, improving, expanding, like life does, like living things do. So what then is the Sunnah way of revival? The Sunnah way of revival is two things. One, that we learn our purpose in life and we don't base it on what our parents taught us, or what society tells us, or what culture tells us. We base it on our own reflection, our own thinking. We come to our purpose in life independently. Yes, we have the Quran. The Quran you can access. You don't need permission from society to access the Quran. You don't need permission from your parents to access the Quran. You know, Ali radiallahu anhu, when he had heard the Prophet Muhammad's message and he wanted to become Muslim, he said, like, first let me go ask my father permission to become Muslim. And as he was walking down, he realized, well, Allah created me, not my father, ultimately. So he turned around and said, no, I'm gonna declare my shahada. He's gonna bear witness to Allah without asking his father's permission, because his father's permission, he didn't need that to be created in the first place. It was Allah that created him. So as a Muslim, you need to base your deen not on what your parents told you, not on what society tells you, but you have to base it on your own investigation, your own direct access to wahi, and thinking about things, reflecting also on kufr, right? On what is rejection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the Prophet Muhammad lived in a society of kufr, and he reflected on the pagan idols and their festivals and things. He reflected upon these things, and he saw that they are false. Right? In order to have certainty in Islam, you have to be certain of what is false. And as Umar radiallahu anhu said, that he fears for a day where Muslims will no longer remember what Kufr or Jahiliyyah was like. Right? He fears that, because once we forget what is falsehood, we will, if we encounter it again, we will fall into it, or we can embrace it. So as a Muslim, first you must understand why you're Muslim. The reason you're Muslim is because your parents told you about Islam, then that's not sufficient. The Quran says, it shows that the pagan Arabs saying to the Prophet Muhammad, should we leave what we found our parents upon, our forefathers upon, to follow your deen, basically? So they argued that I'm not going to leave what my parents told me, that they blindly follow what their parents told them. But there's also another narration, there's a hadith about in the qabr, right, in the grave, everyone is asked, right, what do you believe? So there'll be people that say, I believe La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and there'll be others that say, I heard people saying things and I repeated what I heard them say. So those were the blind followers. So you need to question why you're a Muslim. And if this involves you having to go right back to the very beginning, you could say, and say, how do I know Islam is true? Do it. There's no fear in it, because truth is clear from falsehood. I'm sure you can get confused. Sure, you'll realize that you made many assumptions, but ultimately you'll discover that Islam has an answer for everything, deeper than what you maybe first realized. So don't have a fear about that. Do it. The truth is not a sin, is it? So why are you worried about finding out what the truth is without taking the assumptions of your society that raised you? Go to the source, right? Know for yourself why you're Muslim. That's number one. Then number two is, once you know what the truth is, with certainty, yaqeen, then understand what your purpose in life is and what it means. What I mean by that is that, well, look at all the things you're doing in your life currently. Look at all the things that you're doing in your life. Ask, why am I doing those things? For what purpose? Why? Who am I serving? Who's the master I'm trying to appease? And remove all the false masters and only leave one, right? The real master, right? Which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why am I, and know what Islam requires you to do. So it's not just how do I do my ibadah, or how do I my ritual worships, but how do I do my day-to-day worship beyond the 5 times a day prayer, which is what? Business, commerce, dealing, helping the society, charity. What does an Islamic economic system look like? What does Islamic ruling look like? What does the politics look like of Islam? So politics meaning managing of day-to-day affairs. That's what it means. When people say, I don't want to talk about politics, I want to talk about Islam, you're saying, I don't want to talk about life's affairs, I just want to talk about the beliefs of Islam. That person doesn't want the connection between Islam and life's affairs. Islam is meant to guide life's affairs, right? So they are cutting off Islam from what it's meant to be doing, right? So you need to know the Islamic solutions to life's problems, life's affairs. What should an Islamic society actually look like even? And I mean the details. I don't mean, okay, riba is haram. Okay, so but what does an alternative economic system look like? What is an alternative economic system that allows people to make investments or have lending? How does it do that, or how does it create, entrepreneurship or what have you without using riba? What would that look like? If you don't know the answer to that, then you don't know what Islam requires you to do. Because and every Muslim's part of this. You can't say, "Well, I'm not involved in business, so I don't get." But you have, at some point, you or your family will take a loan. At some point, you and your family will need investment for something or need money for something. So if you don't have an Islamic solution for that, then you're leaving a part of your daily life, your Deen negligent, right? Because your Deen is what is required of you for your whole life's affairs. And I'll leave you with this: Deen. The word Deen, the root word comes from dayin, which means what you owe. This is what you owe. So Deen is what you owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why the day of judgment is also called Yawm ad-Din, right? The day that people will get what is owed and give what is owed, right? What you owe. Right? So as a Muslim, you need to work out your debts, right? What do you owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And what do you owe society, or the culture or anything that changes over time? What do you owe the idea of a country or a nation state, which didn't exist 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago? And what do you owe the one that never had a start point, was never given birth to, and will never end? What do you owe him? And I think lastly, I will leave with those are the 2 points. But if I can add a third point, it's a useful point, which is you need to actually study Kufr. And it's very important. And anyone that says, Abdullah, why should I study Kufr? Why not study Haqq? What use does Kufr have for me except to confuse me? Well, that's interesting because the Quran talks to you about Kufr. It tells you about the Kufr of Christians in the Trinity. It tells you about the Kufr of the ancient Egyptians. It tells you about the Kufr of the pagan Arabs. The Quran has so many verses teaching you about Kufr, about the Kufr of humans and how they went astray. Because you need to know this so you don't make the same mistake. But also, how much brighter does the truth look when compared with Kufr, right, with falsehood? In fact, you have a better understanding of the truth when you know what it's not, when you know what is not the truth. And so for that, I'd recommend heavily to study all the false ideologies in the world today, the false adyan, right, the false deens of the world today. Not just Christianity or what they call Hinduism, but by deens are like worldviews, practices, ways of life. There are new deens in the world today that never existed 1,400 years ago. Socialism or communism, liberalism, right? These and many other isms. These are the false deens of the world today, right? Secularism is part of liberalism, and so is nationalism. But you need to study these false ideologies in order to know why Islam is not like that, why Islam disagrees, why Islam is different from that, and why they are false. You have to know why they are false. If you don't, you're going to fall into them. So I recommend heavily that there's a course which I'm doing with Source Code Academy on the Western Civilization, the origin of Western Civilization, the madhahib of Western Civilization, the schools of thought within it, where it came from, why they think the way they do, why Westerners think the way they do, how they look at the world, how they judge the world, why they are motivated to do the things that they are doing, what deen they are serving, and of course, what purpose drives them, because they have a purpose too, a false purpose. But you see, the thing is, why their society was dynamic is because it had a purpose, but it doesn't have to be a true purpose. Any purpose will do if it drives society forward into making changes, that is. When I say forward, I mean making changes to itself, right? They had a false idea, and that's causes them to make changes because that gives them a purpose. It's a false one, but it doesn't have to be a true one to function as a purpose. All society needs is any kind of a purpose if it drives them to make changes for a deliberate goal, an ideal. Learn about the Western ideal and why it's wrong. Because, as you know, in Pakistan today, there are many Muslims who think that the West, because of their current military and economic superiority, although that's changing, by the way, they are declining, as you know. But because of their current superiority, there must be something good about their Deen, something true about their Deen. So you actually need to know why that's not the case, and why it wasn't because their Deen was, or their Deen, which had a purpose that they adopted, was true, that made them successful, but just simply having a purpose and where they came to the idea in the first place. So there's a lot of things to learn, in fact, and also, subhanAllah, a lot of parallels with the mistakes that Muslims are making now that you'll learn with Western history. So I do recommend going on that course because a lot of things will make a lot more sense. It will not only protect you, but also guide you to actually how to implement Islam as a way of life. The one thing I found useful from the West is they know how to live by a purpose. Right? It's because any society that has a purpose will know how to live by it when they implement it. So one of the many things I find useful for you is when you study the West, how they live by their purpose. You say, that's how they live by their purpose. We need to know how to live by our purpose. Of course, using the Sunnah, but you can see the parallels, right? You can see the parallels with how the West has hikmah in how to follow their purpose. We have forgotten our purpose, let alone having hikmah in following it. So these are the things that we need. Revival requires you need to know why you're Muslim, and you need to understand what your purpose of life is and how to live by it. And once these two things are sorted, then the Muslim world will advance light years ahead of any other civilization, like it did in the past, because we have a Deen that's conducive with human nature. We were designed for it. So no society will be perfect, of course, but it will be far more advanced than any other society. It would outpace any other society because it fits with human. It's a purpose of life. It functions as a purpose, but it also perfectly addresses human nature, makes it optimal, creates an optimal society, not a perfect society because humans are not perfect, but an optimal society. And this is how we can bring revival. So barakallahu feekum, jazakallah khairan for your patience in listening to this. And inshallah, let's now open up to questions. I'd like to hear your questions and your comments, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah, for your session and for sharing your time with us. We truly appreciate it. You already talked a little bit about your course at Source Code Academia. Could I ask you to talk about it a bit more for the next 2 to 3 minutes?
Okay, so basically, the Quran talks about the ancient Egyptians, let's say, and we have the study of the ancient Egyptians called Egyptology, where they study Egyptian civilization, ancient Egyptian civilization. And they talk about their beliefs, what they think was good and bad, their laws, their religion, their ideas, which change over time. And people will find it fascinating to understand how they think. Now, it's good to know, but ancient Egyptian beliefs and ideas don't really have much. They're not a living civilization currently. And so the ancient Egyptians can't do anything to us because they are a dead civilization. They no longer exist. However, it was still useful to know their ideas, why they made the decisions they did. But if that was useful, how much more so is a current day civilization that is currently, at the moment, militarily dominating most of the world, not all, of course, China, Russia, and so on, but they dominate most of the world, and their ideology is dominating most of the world. And they define themselves as that their way of life, their beliefs are the truth. Right? They are the truth. So much so that Muslims themselves, many have adopted their beliefs and are imitators of their beliefs. And many of the elites in the Muslim world They govern the Muslims. They adopted these beliefs, and they govern the Muslims in a way as to control them until the Muslims can eventually adopt Western belief. That's why they are dictators and tyrants, because the Western ideologies actually justify that. You'll find in the course they actually justify the need to treat other civilizations like children, as they call it, until they become adults, which is until they adopt the same mindset as the West. That's why the leaders in the Muslim world, many of them educated in the West, they do what they do. They suppress Islam in the Muslim world. They only want Islam to be like a rich set of rituals. Now, in order to combat against this, you need to know Western beliefs, ideology, why the justifications for itself, why it justifies itself, how it justifies its policies around the world, and why the Muslim elites that have adopted it, why they think the way they do, in order to undo it, in order to combat it, in order to unravel these chains, these intellectual chains around the Muslim world. So to understand the Western way of thinking, and also not to make the same mistake that the West has done. So to do this, you need to understand Western civilization. Where did they come from? Why did they get eventually? They were, and initially they were backwards. But why did they get only in the last 900 years? They began to start developing their technology and so on. And where they got to the way they are, and the different madhahib, the different schools of thought. So many people say, yeah, I hate capitalism. Capitalism's bad. But I'm going to be a socialist to challenge it. So you're not anti-Western. You're just following a different madhab of the West, right? You're not actually outside this Western, the Western ideas. And what makes all these ideologies, like, what is the common aqidah of these ideologies, for example? And why does that aqidah contradict Islam fundamentally, right? And it contradicts rationality and logic fundamentally. But where did they get there? Why did they adopt this aqidah that is false? What is actually confusing the Westerner so they don't see the truth? So this is why it's highly relevant. It's not like ancient Egyptian, or Egyptology course. This is one of a current day Western civilization. Having current day effects in the Muslim world. It invades, attacks the Muslim world. It props up dictators and elites in the Muslim world, and even many Muslims on the ground. The average Muslim is in some way affected and infected by the assumptions of the Western civilization. So if you want to know how to vaccinate and to cure this, then you need to know, you have to study the DNA of the West, and in order to make a vaccine against it, like you would as RNA vaccines, right? You have to get the DNA strands of the virus and then make a vaccine against it. So this is why I heavily urge to study that course, and the course will be directed with the objective of showing how Islam is different and how Islam gives an alternative to the Western ideas and beliefs and different schools of thought: liberalism, communism or Marxism, socialism, libertarianism, anarchism, fascism, social liberalism, which is the current version of liberalism, there's classical liberalism, and so on and so forth. You'll get to see all those different schools of thought and why they're all fundamentally wrong.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Abdullah. We're really enthused about this course with you, and I'm going to be enrolling myself in it as well. And I would encourage the other students here as well to go check the Western Civilization course out at Source Code Academia as well. All right, now on to the questions. So for the students, here's the structure of how the Q&A will go. Those wanting to ask a question, you will raise your hand using the Zoom raise hand option. Those who have sent me their questions, I'll unmute you. You are requested to be clear and precise. Keep your question short and ask one question at a time so our speaker can most qualitatively answer that. So I'll be unmuting Fizan Yassin first. Fizan, I am asking to unmute you. I've actually unmuted you. You will have to accept my request to talk. Fazan, you're here with us?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Abdullah, thanks for the session. My question would be, you talked about the idea of sub-gods. Where this idea, like, all the people have this idea of a superior God, but eventually we see in different cultures this idea of sub-God tries to fit in. So what drives people to this idea when they already believe in a superior God?
That's a very good question. As I said, there are two examples from modern day that show you the mechanism, like how these changes happen, why people do it. One is the Catholic Church, the Catholic Christians, and the others are Hindus, right? Or or let's just call it the Indian pagans, because the word Hindu the Hindu just means someone from Al-Hind, right? The British made that word to separate from the Muslims, but everyone from Al-Hind is Hindi or Hindu, but the religion of the pagans of Al-Hind is actually not even one religion; it's actually multiple religions. But anyway, I'm going to digress on this one. Okay, so not to digress. Basically, it's like this. So let's look at the Catholic Church as just an example, but also we can look at the from the Sunnah, the Hadiths that talked about where the Prophet ﷺ talked about how the pagan Arabs became corrupted. So the Catholics, okay, apart from Jesus being made into a god, which was the major problem with Christian Catholicism, but generally speaking, there's in the Old Testament, so the Jewish Bible, there's one of the 10 commandments is not to make a carved image, not to worship carved images, and not to make carved images. But now, if you go to Catholic churches, you'll see statues of saints. So what's going on? So what happened was the Catholic Church initially never had statues, and then it had saints. It would praise these saints, and then it would argue. Eventually, people would say that these saints had a special relationship with God. It was starting with Mary, and then eventually people would pray to these saints because they say, well, God, he's very high up, right? The assumption starts in people that God is so high, so to speak, so very far away, like physical distance, and his attention span is like a human. The president or the king of your country, wherever country you're from, doesn't have the attention span to hear every single person speak and give them their opinion, right? They have to have ministers. So you can't reach the ruler, so you speak to your local minister, your local councillor, your local politician, right? It's the same. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same assumption. God is too far away to hear you. He doesn't know you personally, or it's hard for him to know you personally, right? That he doesn't understand you, or you're too beneath him for him to grant you your desires. So you need an intermediary to do that, someone that will act between you and God, that will help your case, right, and will bring it to his attention, or at least God won't do what you want, but God will do what this saint wants, or because this saint has better leverage. Just like also again in many societies where to get what you want, it's about who you know, right? Not your rights, but who you know. If you have powerful friends, they can help you get what you want. So these saints are viewed as powerful friends of God that can get you what you want if you go to them in particular. So it all comes from the assumption that God has a limited attention span, right? And or that God you're not worthy enough for God to actually grant you anything. Like he only made you he has a ranking system for humans in terms of what he will listen to, what he won't listen to. Right? I mean, sure, there's a ranking system of piety, yes, but that's not the same as God being willing to listen or not listen, right? Because God listens to everyone in minute and perfect detail. He hears you absolutely clearly. And the Quran combats this, that Allah is more closer to you than your jugular vein, right? I mean, not in the literal sense. But anyway, so It's because over time humans make the assumption I'm not worthy enough for him to listen to me, because they think God works like a human, like their human society does, or they think God works like a human. It's that gradual assumption they make, that they treat him like a human, and therefore these other saints, they pray to them as intercessors. And even in the Catholic Church, they have like the patron saint of travelers, the patron saint of healers. So each saint has a certain department that they are a specialist over. And this works exactly the same way in Hindu paganism, or let's say polytheism, Indian polytheism. The same way, a human can die and become a god on their death. The ancient Greeks had the same idea, and even Romans and even Egyptians, that special people, when they die, they're raised in rank and they become on the level of a god. But the word God, as I said, they understand it as a person with special powers, like special cosmic powers. Not they are all knowing, not that they are all powerful, not that they are uncreated, right? This is where Islam came in to correct people from the corruption they did before, which is, no, this high God that is uncreated has absolute power, doesn't need all these people, which are people, most of them, that you added on later on, doesn't need it. And then also in the hadith as well, there was one about, there's many hadiths that talks about how the pagans became pagan, the pagan Arabs. There were saints there were saints, or like very pious people, they would die, and then people would pray to them to make intercession between them and God. And eventually they would make, because they are far away from the grave, or they're not going to the saint's grave, they would just pray in their homes, or pray else, far away from the grave of the saint. So they said, let's just make an image of the saint, so we all know who we're asking, and maybe the image will make the saint's spirit come to the image, and so he can listen to you. So if you make the image of the dead saint, the dead saint's spirit would partially come into that statue. And even the pagan Hindus today, funny enough, they, the general religious synthesis that they have is they've adopted the idea that there is a god called Brahman, the head divine force, but he's too far. What do they say? He's too far away, disconnected from people to speak to him directly. So Vishnu, Shiva, and Brahma, which is different from Brahma, and all these other ones. These are and Ganesh and all this stuff. They're just avatars. They're like representations of the Brahma, or Brahma are sort of adopting a persona, or there's a dead saint, but the dead saint was guided by Vishnu and whatever, and so he now becomes like a guru, or let's say a guru, sorry, and then he dies. He becomes now like a type of divine power given to him, or what have you. So you can now speak to him or pray to him. I mean, Buddhists who generally don't believe in any god, or well, it's not that they don't believe, it's just that God's not important for Buddhists. But they argue that when you become a Buddha, you then have certain powers, and so now they pray to Buddha, many of them, because now Buddha, when he reached moksha, and when he broke out of the reincarnation cycle, he has now special powers. So now you can pray to him. So the idea of God for these for pagans is more broader, right? It's God is something that has special spiritual or cosmic powers, superhuman, let's say. That's what a god is. And of course, obviously when Islam came to refute that and say, no, ilah is something you worship, and there's only one ilah, right? Everything else are all creatures or inventions. So I hope that makes sense. But ultimately, it all comes down to the belief that you're too unworthy of God to listen to. So you're too unworthy of God for God to listen to you, or God has a limited attention span. That's the desire to have this connection with God, where like it's easier to speak to a statue that's smiling or looks nice, or like, look, a nice statue smiling at me, makes me feel closer to God. This is just illusions and delusions. If you truly understood Allah's power and his mercy and his awareness, you'd know that he's in this room with you now. He is with you right now. He sees every single tiny thing you think, you do, everything. He's intimately aware of this, and he is willing to listen and respond to you when you ask him directly. I mean, okay, this is now a personal anecdote, but I've often found that my relationship with Allah is personal. I have a personal relationship, and by that I mean I speak to him like he was next to me in the same room. That he's here for me, as in to listen to me, and that he's willing to hear my repentance, and he's willing to grant what he feels is best for me, even if I don't know, and so which he might not grant what I ask because he knows what's best for me. So I don't need any idols, statues, shrines, or anything. Allah's here with me right now. He's here with you. He's there with you right now. In the not in a literal sense for those who are doing the philosophers, what he's physically containing you, but no, but he is for something that is omniscient and omnipotent and sustain the very universe. He is more here present with me than anyone else, even family members could be. So anyway, if you understand this, you'll be safe from polytheism, from idolatry, and from needing intercession.
Thank you for that answer. I am sure that answered Fazan's question. Next, we will take Muhammad Shadi. Muhammad Shadi, I have asked to unmute you. Please accept that request.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Abdullah, for the inspiring and thoughtful session. My question is, if the Prophet ﷺ were beginning today with a community that possesses nation states, international law, modern economies, and digital technology, which elements of the Meccan and Madinian methodology are timeless principles and which were context specific? How do we distinguish them using usul fiqh rather than personal judgment? Thank you so much.
Okay, so there's a very, very simple delineation, if you like, for you to know what to take, what not to take. So when it comes to what you should and should not do, what is good and bad, only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is the only one who defines what is good and what is bad. And he defines what is deserved. So what people deserve and what they don't deserve. Only Allah is the criteria for that. So outside of that, then everything else that's left are objects and things that, like a knife, a fork, a plane, a car, a computer. These are all objects or tools, you could say. So tools, there's no such thing as a good and bad tool, only tools that can be used for good and bad. It depends how you want to use these particular tools. And so in that sense, all tools are useful, and all tools can be taken and improved, adapted, and what have you. But anything concerning what people deserve, what they don't deserve, their rights, and what they should be protected from, and what they deserve in terms of what they should be given, can only be defined from the creator of the universe, who is the ultimate source of determining good and bad, right? And what is deserved, what Deen, right? What is owed, what you owe, what you don't owe. So, so in essence, the idea of what they call international law, which is just international law, is just simply a collection of treaties between governments around the world. There's no such thing as an international law that everyone that is above the country. You understand? Because people say country sovereignty, but the idea of legitimacy. So, what is legitimate? What is a legitimate government? This is a question about good and bad, right? So we can't take it from anywhere except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as an example, in Islam, the sovereignty belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the authority belongs to the Ummah. And what I mean by that is that Allah decides the laws, decides what gives the commands, but the one who, this is upon all of us as a collective Ummah, but who is the one who is the executive, so the one who leads on fulfilling these collective obligations? Well, no Muslim has the authority to begin implementing on a leadership level that, except the one who the Ummah selects. So the Ummah has to select the leaders that will lead them in fulfilling the commands of the sovereign, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our authority belongs to the Ummah to select the leader. But the leader is bound, and because the Ummah is bound by the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if the leader doesn't implement the commands of Allah in terms of laws, then he is illegitimate. So he is not a leader anymore, because you, as a Muslim, you have to affirm the good and bad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you say alcohol, I'm going to make alcohol permissible, then this is haram. The leader cannot be obeyed, and in fact, he also leaves Islam at the same time. Whereas that's different from a leader that says the commands of Allah is this, and this is the laws. The laws of this land is Allah's command. But I sometimes I will drink a bit alcohol in private, right? Then ideally he should be punished, because no Muslim is above the law. But if you can't get to punish him, it doesn't mean he's illegitimate exactly, at least according to Sunni, the Sunni schools of thought anyway. The Ibadi school of thought disagrees with that. They're the ones who are somewhat connected with the Khawarij, but they're in Oman. They're no longer violent. But anyway, that's a different discussion. I don't want to get too much into fiqh details. But just to give you an example of, so the good and bad must come from Allah. The should not, what is deserved, what is not deserved, is defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the tools, which is called madaniya, right, in Arabic, which connects to the word the city, because in the medieval and ancient world, the city was the place of industry. It was the place of making things, building things, tools and things like this. So madaniya, tools and various things, mathematics and all this kind of stuff. You can take it from anywhere, right? And you should improve upon it, so that we control the means of producing it ourselves. Whereas the good and the bad, the Qur'an can only be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his book, and his revelations.
Okay, so the authority to select is with Allah Ta'ala, and the tools can be taken from anywhere as long as they don't defy the law of Allah. That sums it up. Thank you. Aisha Wani, you are next. I am unmuting you. Please ask your question. Aisha?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wa alaykum salam.
All right, great. Thank you. And it was really, really nice hearing from you. I have two questions. My first question is based on the current world order and how we're seeing the deterministic aspect of life, or how societies move in general, right? That was postulated by Ibn Khaldun. So the question essentially is, do you think that we are actually going to make a major difference in the global world order by our endeavors based on, the eschatological predictions as well? So even if we're going to try, is that actually going to make a global difference? That's the first question. And the second question is regarding, you mentioned having a purpose and that, yes?
Yeah, we'll let Abdullah answer the first one, and then you can move to the next question after that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
you. I mean, I don't have a problem taking two at the same time, the questions, but khair, inshallah. So, eschatological question. What's very fascinating is that up until up until about 1100 of the European calendar, the common belief amongst Europeans, Christians, was that this world is ruled by the devil. It's actually from the Christian books, but not from Jesus' teachings. But anyway, it's a long story. From the Christian books. So the world is ruled by the devil, and nothing good is going to come until Isa alayhi salam comes back. So there's no point trying to improve anything or change anything. You're doomed to failure. Only preserve your aqidah as a Christian and stick to the church, the Jama'ah. That's what the church means in Greek, actually. Jama'ah. It translates literally into Arabic as Jama'ah. So stick to the Jama'ah. Fulfill your rituals and stay away from sins and repent until either you die or Jesus comes back, and then you'll have like a positive change. So a lot of sons are coming in here, and then the world will change for the better. After 1100s, when they encountered the Muslims, well, they encountered Muslims before that, but they started to find Muslim books and so on. They discovered something that shocked them. It was very shocking to them. That human life can be improved in this world before Jesus comes back. That was the major shocking idea they encountered, and this will be covered in the course, by the way. This is part of the Western history. And based on that shock, they started to change their worldview, and then they started to technologically progress after they stopped that worldview. Muslims have adopted, we've switched places with the West on this. Now we adopt this worldview, whereas before we never had it. The Sahabas, you see, the Prophet Muhammad sallam, according to one narration, didn't even know if the Dajjal would come in his lifetime. He didn't know, he didn't know when he was going to come. He could even come and he said, if he comes now, I'll contend with him. So they didn't know when the last day was coming. The last day is very close, like between the two fingers, as according to hadith by the Prophet Muhammad. But in the scale of human history, 2 fingers could be 500 years, 1,000 years, 2,000, could be 5,000 years, because humans have been around for up to maybe even 3 to 4, 500,000 years, maybe even 1 million years, depending on your definition of a human from the skeletons we find. So we don't know. Basically, we don't know when the end times is, when it's coming. There was always wars, there was famines, there was many problems, many issues always occurring, but we don't know how long that's going to be. Remember that even the Prophet Muhammad, he said in another narration that a hole in the wall of Yajuj and Majuj, the wall that blocks Yajuj and Majuj, has opened up this big because of the bad deeds of the Arabs and things like this. So people thought, maybe Yajuj and Majuj is going to come out soon now, because the way he's discussing it. No, now one of the signs of the end times is already here. That's 1,400 years ago, right? So the Sahabas never cared about when the end times were coming, when it relates to what they had to do now, right? There's another hadith saying if it's the last day comes and you're planting a tree, finish planting it. So the idea of the end times was irrelevant. And I see, the only important thing you need to know about the Dajjal and the end times or what have you is, don't worship any guys. Don't worship any human beings, especially ones that can't fix their eyes. Yeah? And Ayatul Kursi. Right? That's it. That's all you need to know about the Dajjal topic. Move on. I mean, all you need to know about concerning what is relevant to your actions, is just don't worship any humans, whatever magic they can do, and study and recite, be able to recite Ayatul Kursi. Okay, that's it, done. In terms of your actions, that's it. That's the only 2 points that it affects. Move on. Okay. So, and of course, there's a hadith that talks about the end times with positive things. It talks about that there'll be the time of the Prophet Muhammad, the time of Nubuwwah will be along amongst us, and then it will go. Then it will be Khilafah Rashida, the rightly guided Khilafah, and then it will go. Then it will be Mulkan Abdudan, like a hereditary rulership, and then it will go. And then it will be Mulkan Jibriyan. It will be a oppressive forced government upon us, and then it will be Khilafah Rashida min Manhaj Nabuwwah. Then it will be a rightly guided Khilafah will come back on the method of the Prophet, and then it says the earth and the skies will give their fruits, will give their So will give their blessings and things. So it'll be abundance. It will be blessings for both the earth and the skies on this endeavor. This is narrated in Muslim Ahmed bin Hanbal, and it's Sahih. So why doesn't that motivate us? There's a hadith on the hadith on the Mahdi. There's a hadith on the Mahdi, with him arriving. I say yes, and he'll bring justice to the world from where there was no justice. He didn't say there was no justice beforehand. He'll just say that where for all the injustices in the world, he will replace that with justice. But there's a hadith that talks about that there'll be a caliph will die, and there'll be a bickering between three candidates, each the son of the caliph, and then the Mahdi comes. So there's already a Khilafah at the time of the Mahdi. The Khilafah will already be existing at the time of the Mahdi. In fact, Muslims didn't know the Khilafah would stop happening. They thought the Khilafah would come, the Mahdi would come, during the time of the United Muslim Khilafah. So these are things you need to bear in mind. Do not be stuck in the eschatology. It will come when Allah wills. What's more important is what do you do before the end times, and which could be 1,000 years from now. We don't know, right? And what do you do before your end times? Your end times being the date when you die. There's another hadith where the Prophet Muhammad basically intimated that the end times for everyone is actually when they die. Right, so that's your end times, right? Your personal end times, not the end time. Anyway, so think about that, and Allah will grant us success. Allah, obviously, the Quran promises success for those who do righteous deeds. That Allah will grant them succession to the present world on the earth, and they'll safety from the time of fear they used to be in. So, if you are maintaining your good deeds. But it has to be holistic. It can't just be, I'm just praying. I'm going to pray, and the world will become good if I pray. Not enough. The Prophet Muhammad didn't only pray, did he? And neither did the Sahabas. They went out into the world, right? And they changed it for the good. So we need to have exactly the same mindset.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Abdullah, we have a myriad of questions in the chat, and there's so many hands raised, but your time is really valuable. So if you can indicate to me whether you'd be able to take more questions or not, then we'll be taking more people accordingly.
Sure. Well, I said you guys made your time for me, so I'll make my time for you. So I can give you so I'll give a 4 hour question and answer. So from when the time I did, so I'll give you about 20 more minutes. That's like an hour of Q&A. So hopefully that should cover most of them.
That is perfect. Thank you so much. So next we will be taking Ahmed Welmi. Ahmed, I have unmuted you. You can ask your question.
Am I audible?
You are.
Jazakallah khair, Abdullah, for the session. My question is, there is a narrative among the Muslims that Western tools like democracy is compatible with Islam. Some say it is anti-Islam. So the question is, how can we know that which tool from the West we can adopt, or all the tools from the West are anti-Islam? So is there a filter that we can gauge that what we can choose from the Western civilization or not?
Okay, so the difference between, as I said, physical tools and like all social tools and things, and what you should and shouldn't do, what rights and what is deserved, what is not. So in Islam, we would not say that Muslims have the right to appoint legislators who will legislate on behalf of their interests. That is kufr, because those who make the rules are only allowed to make rules in the attempt to fulfill what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to implement. Think of it like this. So imagine there's a king, and the king is in a chamber in his throne room, and only the wazir can go up to it, but he can't go into the chamber. He can only listen at the door. So the wazir of the king Now, the king doesn't appoint the wazir. The king says to the people, you appoint the wazir. So we know that we heard the king say to us, you appoint the wazir that will speak, that will obey me and implement my command on the people. So the people appoint the wazir. So now the wazir has authority. Now the wazir can only go to the door of the throne room, and he only gets the writings of the king. The king doesn't speak to him directly. He writes commands, and the king, the wazir, has to implement them. Now the wazir can't ask the king what he means by some of these commands. He has to just try his best to interpret the writing of the king's written orders, interpret them and implement them. And in fact, in all life's affairs, in all businesses and things, generally speaking, many people are trusted by their managers to try to interpret what the managers want them to do to the best of their ability. Even if they make a mistake, it's not a problem as long as they were trying their best to implement what the manager wanted and not rebel against the manager, like in a shop or in a business or something like this. So the same with this. In this case, for Muslims, the wazir is the Khalifa or the Imam of the Muslims, and he has also his own delegated officials. So he has to try his best to implement the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if he makes mistakes in understanding what Allah wants, as long as his intention is to only implement what Allah wants. So he makes the laws. He implements the laws. Maybe, what about the traffic? What about the highway code, as they say, or the motor, what do we do with this? Well, the Caliph has to, or the Imam of the Muslims has to say, well, what does Allah want me to do in this situation? And then what would it look like? And so if the case is, well, Allah wants us to make a code that creates safety and efficiency on the roads so that people can go from A to B safely, then we have to look at the nature of cars and roads and things to see what would be. So the king only requires us to make rules that allow people to move safely from A to B using cars and make the most efficient way of doing this. So what's the most efficient way that they can go the quickest, so everyone goes to the A to B the quickest way possible. And on this level now, this is not the level of commands, because we've already fulfilling the command by finding a code for the motorway, but it's based on the nature of the motorway now, the nature of the cars. And then we have to study cars, we have to study drives, we have to study the history of motorways, and then we come to a code. Can we use another country's highway code that they have developed to achieve safety and efficiency? Well, yes, as long, but the usul of safety and efficiency comes from the Qur'an and Sunnah. It doesn't come from the Western basis. But then once we have a safety and efficiency as our usul, we can adopt any hikmah, so any wisdom of managing these material objects, cars and drivers and motorways, based on the nature of what these things are. Because this is now a study of the tools, right? It's a study of how do we manage these tools in these situations. So this is not about rights, because everyone has a right to travel. The Quran establishes this, not the West. Everyone has the right to not be attacked, or and for people to be not negligent when they are traveling, so they hit people, they hurt people. The Quran and Sunnah already establishes this right. These are all from the Quran and Sunnah. But now, how do we manage the moving vehicle, the car, on roads or highways, with drivers and which are, how we see them operate when they're on the roads? What's the best way to manage this? This is now a question of managing tools. So we can adopt it from anyone who has a good system of managing these tools, or we can make our own one from first principles, right? But because the hadith is a hadith that says that the hikmah is the lost property of the believer. Wherever he finds it, he has the most right to it. So hikmah, so wisdom. And what does wisdom mean? Wisdom means, isn't it funny how we never define these words, right? We use these words, we never define them. So what is hikmah? Wisdom. It can mean judgment, yes, but judgment for what? To achieve the best way to achieve outcome, which means to achieve an outcome in multiple circumstances the most efficient way, right? So if anyone else has a hikmah on how to deal with these things that Islam required them to deal with, then we use it. But the usul, the principles we bring to looking at situation comes only from the Quran and Sunnah. That makes sense.
Okay, this will be the last question that we will be taking. I am going to unmute Zakir. Actually, Zakir has not raised his hand, so I will be taking Hassam since we received his question. Nope. Omar Rahman? Omar?
My question is that why certainty in Kufr is also necessary, and how can we achieve that? Because we can't study all of the religions in our whole lifetime.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So, is studying Kufr a necessity, seeing that we can't study all the religions in our lifetime? Well, basically, it doesn't have to be a whole lifetime study, because you can be, like, for example, you start with the basic questions first, and then you start to eliminate whole branches of beliefs as you do deal with. You start to eliminate the roots, the false roots. So if I can prove God exists, then this eliminates every atheist belief system, materialist beliefs. If I can eliminate God, if I can say that deism is false, the idea that God exists but he doesn't care about the universe, then I can eliminate a whole bunch of adyan from that deduction. If I can demonstrate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this created universe, is not a human being and is not created, then I can eliminate every religion that depicts him as a human being, let's say, and that ought to be worshipped as a human being. See, so I can cut off thousands of belief systems from just one principle I've determined. So it doesn't have to be a half study every single one. It could simply be going from first principles and cutting off the false branches, you could say. Well, rather than cutting off every tiny sub leaf from the branch, to use the tree analogy, a tree pruning analogy. So I hope that makes sense. And as I said, I mean, I teach courses, and I, inshallah, an upcoming course with source code will be on, in essence, proving Islam, the truth of Islam. Not just the truth of Islam from the usual avenues where people say, well, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu was he trustworthy, and these usual ways that people do it. But I actually look at the message itself. I actually show that Islam is the only possible explanation of reality, the only possible one. No other one is actually possible. So it's not that Islam is the best explanation of reality. Islam is the only explanation of reality. Every other explanation has contradictions in it. There's a problem that contradiction doesn't make sense. And as the Quran says, had this been from any other than Allah, you would find many contradictions in it. Many people assume it's a book that does not contradict within itself. But the broadest understanding of contradiction is that it contradicts al-waqiyah. It contradicts the reality, the observable reality. Because the Quran tells you to observe reality, by the way. So all of reality has to be explained without contradictions. Right? That means life, death, the universe, cosmos, creatures, viruses, bacteria, everything. Pain, pleasure, kufr, belief, everything has to be explained. Human history, everything. Right? Which Deen can explain it without contradiction? So I say only Islam is the only possible one. And I usually why I go from that angle is mostly because most people who convert to Islam, they don't actually convert to Islam because the Prophet Muhammad was deemed to be a righteous man or like a truthful man as the only basis for why you should believe it. Because Buddha is described as a righteous man, Jesus, and some of we believe in Jesus as well. But the Christian conception of Jesus, right, we disagree with. Like they say he's God on top of just being a normal human. So there's many pious and righteous people throughout with a pious and righteous reputation, but that's not enough, is it? Right, to know if they're true, because someone could be sincerely, wrong or self-deluded, or insane, right? But feel they are generally righteous. So we have to go beyond simply looking at the nature of the person delivering the message and look at the content of their message itself. Like, is the message verified? Is it true? And many people become Muslim because they say Islam makes sense. They say it like that. Right? Islam just makes. I mean, I'm a convert to Islam too. And I ask myself the question, really, why do we say Islam makes sense? Like, what is our intuition detecting that our intellect hasn't yet realized? Right. So in a way, I just put down what our intuition detected into an intellectual form for a course. Inshallah, that will come up in a future Source Code Academy kind of course. Inshallah, that will be offered. But yeah, so you don't have to study all of Kufr. You just need to build up the principles of what you know for certain. So that there is only one God, that God exists, that God cares about what he creates. He's not crazy, that he just makes the universe and doesn't know what he's doing, and doesn't care about it, and doesn't know what he's actively sustaining. Right? He has to sustain the universe, and he doesn't know what he's doing. Right? So you have to start building up those principles with certainty, and then you'll realize that it starts to reduce the amount of possible religions that are true to eventually you'll get down to the Abrahamic religions, and then you'll get down to either Unitarian Christianity, so a Christianity that does not believe in the Trinity and believes that Jesus is a man, and Judaism and Islam, and then those three will be left, and then you can go further. But I'll save that for that course, only because I lack time here to give you a fuller explanation. But yeah, so you can, but you have to know what kufr is in order to discount it, to remove it from the equation, to have certainty. You must know what is not true to know what is true.
Okay, I think that has to be the take-home message, that you have to verify and know what is true and what is not true. So, Mr. Abdullah, thank you so much. You have
Sister, before we go, sorry to interrupt. We do have 8 minutes left, so I did promise a full hour, so I want to fulfill my promise. I gave my word. Now, there was a sister that asked the question about the eschatology, so I think I almost implied I would answer the second question, so I want to fulfill that promise, and then we'll see if we can squeeze in any more questions after that.
Right, that sister, Aisha Vanishi, seems to have left the session. I think it's namaz time here, that's why. So we can take someone else, perhaps Ibad Jahangir, if that's all right with you.
Okay, khair, inshallah. But I'll be quick because I don't want anyone to delay their namaz. We mustn't forget who the master is, that we all have to follow. We all have to.
Thank you for giving me the chance. My question is that, is it permissible to criticize a Muslim ruler in public if he disobeys Allah's commandments?
Short answer, yes, and this is in the Sunnah, in multiple hadiths. So I have an article on my website, abdullahAlandalusi.com, and I think I've pinned it up. But I think if you go to my Instagram account and you see the links there, I've put the article on there. So I used that from the hadith and Sunnah, Sahabas publicly criticizing the ruler in the Jummah prayer, as well as even also behind their back as well. So the Sahabas criticized. That's how we know about the criticisms of the Sahabas of rulers and what have you, because they themselves did it, and it's recorded in the Athar of the Sahabas, as well as obviously. I mean, you can't really find the Prophet Muhammad criticizing his ruler because he was the Imam of the Muslims and the ruler of Medina, so he can't be criticizing himself. But even during his time in Makkah, he was criticizing the nobles, the Mala, the nobles of the Quraysh. But people might say, but they're just pagans, they're polytheists, so it's okay to do that. Okay, fine. But if you want to look at the Sahabas criticizing leaders amongst themselves, then yes, there is loads of that.
That definitely answers the question. Okay, so it's time to wrap up. Mr. Abdullah, you've given us more than what we asked for in terms of how valuable your time is, while you've answered more or less of all of the questions that were asked. So we will conclude today's session here. Thank you once again, Sir Mr. Abdullah Andalusi, for taking the time out to be with us, and to everyone else for your participation. We have learned so much from you today, And we hope and look forward to learning so much more from you in your course, the Western Civilization course. Thank you once again. Jazakumullahu khairan kathira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Barakallahu feekum for having me on. Barakallahu feekum everyone who attended, for your time and patience, your questions, and inshallah I hope to see you again soon. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.